Okay, thanks for joining us today. For those who don't know me, I'm Darlene McLennan and I'm the manager of the Australian Disability Clearinghouse on Education and Training, ADCET for short. Just want to make you aware that today's webinar is being live captioned. To activate the captions, click on the CC button in the toolbar that is located either at the top or the bottom of your screen. We also have captions available via the browser, and Jane will now put the URL into the chat box for you to access it. ADCET is hosted on Lutruwita, Tasmanian Aboriginal Land, Sea and Waterways. And I want to acknowledge with deep respect the traditional custodians on the land, on this land, the Palawa people. I stand for a future that profoundly respects and acknowledges Aboriginal perspective, culture, language and history, and a continued effort to fight for justice, Aboriginal justice and rights, paving the way for a strong future. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the various lands on which you are all working or studying today, and any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders participating. Our presenters today, Dr. Erin Leaf and Laura Elfrey from Monash University, will be sharing with us their presentation, Designing Online Education That Works for All Students, a 7-step UDL approach. This topic is certainly popular. We received over 430 registrations, probably about half an hour when we last looked. If you'd like to be kept up to date on any future webinars, if you have, this is the first time you've been with us, you can sign up to our newsletter and information will go straight into your email so you can see what is coming up in the future. We'll put a link into the chat box now. Before we begin, just a couple of more housekeeping details. As I said, the webinar is being live captioned by Donna from Bradley Reporting and will be recorded. The recording will be made available on ADCET in the coming days. You should receive an email after this webinar with the link to where that will be. But if you go onto the ADCET website, you can see all the webinars that we've recorded previously. They're up there for prosperity. If you have any technical difficulties throughout this session, you can email us on admin@adcet.edu.au. The webinar will run for around 45 minutes. Then at the end, we'll have 15 minutes or so for questions. Throughout the presentation, please feel free to use the chat box with us and each other to have general conversations, like where are you coming from today? And to say hi to everybody, and make sure you choose all panelists and attendees so we can all read it. Erin and Laura have kindly said they're happy to answer questions at the end of the webinar. If you would like me to ask a question of them, could you please put that into the Q&A box? That just kind of separates the general chat and it kind of then really clearly identifies that you want that question asked. We've also enabled the upvote button in the Q&A box, so you can actually vote for your the most popular questions, or you can also comment in that Q&A box so we can have a bit of a discussion there. I've also got Alicia Ford, an NDCO, and Jane Hawkswood helping me in the background. So that's it for the housekeeping. Now I'm going to hand over to Erin and Laura, and I'll catch you all at the end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Darlene, and thank you to ADCET for inviting us today. My name is Laura Elfrey, and today Erin Leaf and I, both of whom are from the Faculty of Education at Monash University, are going to be talking to you about designing online education that works for all/more students. The slash is there because, as I'm sure you're aware, designing online education is complex and it's ongoing work, and we really don't want to undermine that. And we definitely can't give you everything you need in 45 minutes. But what we hopefully will do over the next 40 minutes is focus and provide on some specific strategies and practices that can add to your suite of existing inclusive practices. Before I start, I'd like to echo Darlene's acknowledgement. I'm zooming in from the lands of the Bunwurrung people. They are the owners of the land that I live and work on. And I'd like to extend my acknowledgement to the Bunwurrung people, elders past and present, and thank them for welcoming me into their community, their guidance and their teaching over the last decade or so. So you'll see on the screen there a map of where we are. Bunwurrung Land stretches from just west of Naarm, the Werribee River, all the way to the east to a place known as Wilson's Promontory. If you can ever travel again, that will be a lovely place to visit. Okay, just one more thing before we get stuck in. What we present today is a culmination of a range of work and conversations between not only Erin and I, but also some of our wonderful colleagues from the Faculty of Education at Monash, including Christine Grove, Stella Lolitas, and Umesh Sharma. So we just wanted to acknowledge that the ideas shared today were not developed in a vacuum, and we were brought together by passion for equity and inclusion across our teaching, research and service. What we are going to do today is these three things, /4. Firstly, I'm going to share a little bit about the background and how Erin and I have got to this point of being able to talk to you about designing practical and research informed approaches for online learning. I'm going to very briefly mention the current context within which we're trying to do this work, acknowledging that you are probably already wildly aware of current challenges facing tertiary educators and educators more broadly right now, especially if you're in particular parts of Australia and internationally who are in lockdown. So once I've done that, I'll hand over to Erin, who will share what you've probably all been waiting for, which are the practical and research-informed approaches on how to create inclusive and online learning experiences. So in terms of background, the project that brought Erin, Christine, Stella and myself together was entitled The Impact of Online Coach Education on the Inclusion and Participation of Individuals with Autism Spectrum Disorder in Sport. Mouthful. And as part of that project, our starting point was provided by DeLuca. So DeLuca shared a continuum including 4 different conceptions of inclusion, and the 4th conception, which he argued we strive for, was known as transgressive conception of inclusion. And if we are prescribing or striving for transgressive inclusion, diversity is expected. There's an assumption that we all bring strengths. Student diversity is used as a vehicle for the generation of new knowledge and learning experiences. Labeling, stereotypic labeling in particular, is limited and avoided where possible. And there's a focus on multiplicity, multiplicity of strengths, multiplicity of models, capacities, responses, representation. So Erin's going to shortly introduce universal design for learning. And as we were exploring DeLuca's work, at the same time, we were seeing some really nice links between his framework and also universal design for learning principles, or UDL. So in this project, focusing on coach education, we brought together DeLuca's work with universal design for learning principles, and we enacted and used the Quality Matters framework. There's a link in the presentation there if you'd like to know more. But the Quality Matters rubric, underpinned by UDL principles, allowed us to explore and evaluate the accessibility of particular coach education offerings. The process was so fruitful, it made sense to us, acknowledging that this project happened last year at the height of, or at least the outset of the COVID pandemic. It made sense to apply what we'd learned in the context of this research project into our teaching and learning in teacher ed, and in the ever-changing context that we're still working in. So that's kind of where we came from. And the context, I will keep this brief. As I said, I'm sure you're wildly aware, but COVID-19 meant a rapid shift online for many of us. For me, it was 12 hours. Okay, so we were prompted to move away from viewing Moodle or Blackboard or whatever your online portal is. At least I was prompted from viewing that as a resource depository. And I shifted from that to having to think really carefully about what my only portal to the students was going to represent and look like. It needed to be detailed, well organized, offering carefully curated resources that provided opportunities for all of my students to succeed and participate. We also had to start to think about inclusion in ways that we might not have had to prior. Do our students have devices? Do they have access to the internet? But also, is the online education I'm providing working for all of my students? So with that in mind, even if our colleagues do not sense a moral obligation to start asking some of these questions, policy and legal requirements mean that we have to do this. We have to create inclusive and safe spaces for our students to learn, participate, and succeed. The OECD has identified higher ed institutions as having an obligation to improve their approach to the inclusion of students with a disability. And Article 24 of the UN Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities states that without discrimination and on the basis of equal opportunity, signatories shall ensure an inclusive education system at all levels. So our assumption here is that access to education is a right and not a privilege for all, but people with a disability as well. So thanks to a scholar, Kent, about 5 years ago, they did some research on challenges facing students with disabilities in the tertiary sector. And these are some of the key challenges that were identified through that work. Knowing where to get help or accommodations, problems with inaccessible technology, lack of personal relationships with lecturers, difficulty navigating the online learning environment, not knowing what to do each week with the online portal being too unstructured at times, lack of opportunities to get to know classmates, and feeling like the course content lacked authenticity, purpose, or was not pitched at the right level. So with all that in mind, and thanks to the delightful media, we are hyper aware of issues that have been raised in relation to tertiary education, both in Australia and overseas over the last 18 months. If you can't see the snippets on the screen there, they are screenshots from online media highlighting issues related to the provision of students with disabilities in terms of online learning, remote learning continuing after restrictions have lifted, and the absence of policies that assure quality online learning and education. So it's a complex and ever-changing context within which we work, and as I said at the outset, our responses to that can't really be discussed in 40 minutes. But what we are going to do now is I'm going to hand over to Erin, who is going to provide some practical strategies and steps that we can take to overcome some of these challenges and maximise the chance of universities and educators being more inclusive and catering for all students. Over to you, Erin.
Thanks, Laura. Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Erin Leaf from Monash University, and I'll be presenting the remainder of our sort of topic for today. So we know students are experiencing challenges. We know that this isn't just related to COVID-19, but the pandemic has really skyrocketed the degree to which these challenges are coming to the forefront. So what we're going to do today is talk about some steps we can take to address these challenges to ensure that universities, TAFEs, other tertiary education institutions are truly inclusive places for all students. So what I will do next is talk you through our 7 steps for inclusive online learning design with some illustrative examples from our own units. So I want to begin by noting that I'm not going to be telling you about a new educational technology or a new way of engaging with your students. In fact, you're probably all using some really great teaching tactics already. Rather, I'm going to talk about a framework for designing online education that is adaptable and flexible and can accommodate lots of different technologies and engagement activities. So first, decide how you are going to present content on your Moodle site or on your learning management system, using a structure that is clear and easy to navigate. Here's an example of how I do this on my Moodle homepage. I use clear section headers so students know exactly where to find the content that they need. Using a clear and intuitive structure will reduce cognitive load for students. In other words, it will reduce the time that students spend searching for content, and it will help them start engaging with the content right away. This can reduce frustration and anxiety in students and has the added benefit of reducing the number of emails that you receive from confused students. And this will directly alleviate some of the challenges related to navigating the online learning environment. So as an online teacher, you really have to think of yourself as a mapper of the journey, not simply the deliverer of information. Second, create a section at the beginning of your Moodle site to orient students to Moodle and to the unit. So I create a video tour of Moodle in which I actually show the students how to navigate through the site and find the content and learning activities. I've titled this video, "Watch Me First." So it's very clear to students that this is the very first thing that they should do. The video tour also gives me an opportunity to welcome students into the unit, and this can help students feel more connected to the unit instructors. And it also helps them learn to navigate the Moodle site and find what they need. Again, your mission is to help the students engage in less searching and more learning and engaging with the material. Also, including a getting started book in your unit information section can be really useful. Here's an example of how I do that. Each page or chapter in the book has a clear title that explains what information is presented in the text. You can use the Getting Started book to present an overview of the unit level learning objectives, what students should be doing each week, the needed textbooks for the unit, a list of frequently asked questions, and other specific information that might normally be presented in a syllabus. This semester, I plan to add a chapter on how students can access disability support services at Monash. So students who need support above and beyond that provided proactively by us know exactly who to contact. And this will help address the identified challenge of students not knowing where to go to get that extra help and support. I want to highlight now the importance of constructive alignment in unit design, particularly when you're designing and delivering content online asynchronously. When delivering content to students primarily online, or even using Moodle just to supplement your face-to-face teaching, it's critical to ensure that the students understand the purpose of what you're asking them to do. Students need to understand how the content that you're presenting on the Moodle site links to the learning objectives and how engaging with the content will ultimately prepare them to complete any assessments. And here's an example of some unit level learning objectives that I've created for one of my units. What I want you to do is pay close attention to the action verb in each one of these learning objectives. I try to avoid using verbs such as the student will know or will understand, because these verbs are difficult to objectively define and measure. By contrast, I've selected action verbs such as the student will design, will organize, analyze, identify, recommend, and use to be more explicit and clear about what it is that I want my students to be able to do and say upon completing this unit. Now, I always end the Getting Started book with clear instructions to the students on what they should do next, and be very specific. This again can go a long way toward alleviating student frustration, confusion, and anxiety. In my book, I provide links to other important aspects of the unit that I want students to become familiar with, and invite them to introduce themselves in the Learning Community Forum. I then direct them to begin working through the content for week 1. Students have reported that online learning minimizes their opportunities to make connections with their classmates and teachers. One way to address this is by using a learning community forum. first of all, to have students just introduce themselves. This helps students feel connected to their instructor and to their classmates. And I recommend posing an interesting question, giving students some direction as to how to introduce themselves and what sort of info to share to make it interesting and fun. And I find that doing this makes it more engaging and more students comment on each other's posts and actively participate. And as the instructor, I make sure to be present in that forum and personally welcome each student when they introduce themselves. Now, the next step is to ensure that the weekly section of content or the topic section is set up in the same way every week. This will minimize the likelihood of students feeling lost. And not only does this help the students by decreasing their anxiety and allowing them to get right into learning, again, it will help you as an instructor by reducing the number of emails you get from confused students. So here's an example of how I set up the weekly content and present it to the students on Moodle. First, I provide the students with a week at a glance that provides a general overview of the topic for the week. Next, I provide a set of topic level learning objectives. These learning objectives are aligned to the unit level learning objectives, but they're more specific and detailed. I also provide the students with a list of clear terms that they should be on the lookout for and be able to define by the end of the week. This helps guide their attention to relevant concepts when doing the weekly readings and engaging with the weekly content. Next, I provide a list of the readings that students should complete before engaging with the content for the week. And this is designed to incorporate elements of the flipped model of teaching, in which students are provided with an introduction to the content before engaging with the learning activities. Primary readings are designed to give students the foundational knowledge to better understand the topic and engage effectively with the weekly content, whereas supplemental readings provide additional information, and the students can come back and engage with those readings at a later time. The next step is to be very strategic in aligning the weekly content to the stated learning objectives. This addresses, again, that identified challenge of students feeling like online learning or the content lacks meaning or purpose, or it doesn't tell a cohesive story. Again, as an online educator, you have to think of yourself as a storyteller. So now that the learning objectives have been developed, our unit level learning objectives have been developed, and we've designed the assessment tasks, we can start designing the content. First, I consider how I will strategically select content that is directly related to each of the topic level learning objectives. Second, since my units are delivered primarily in an asynchronous mode, I need to think about how to deliver content that students can engage with at their own pace on their own time. So the content that I provide on Moodle is meant to take the form of mini interactive lessons that replicate the types of learning and teaching activities that would commonly be delivered face-to-face. So I aim to include a variety of different activities, such as video recorded lectures, interspersed with interactive knowledge checks, discussion forums, supplemental readings, etc., to help students actively respond and engage with the material. So to keep the weekly activities organized, I use the books resource on Moodle. So this slide shows an example of how the learning activities book is presented to the students on the Moodle page. So each week has its own learning activities book. And think about clicking into the learning activities book being analogous to stepping into the classroom for your weekly class experience. The learning activities book is divided into a series of chapters, as shown here. Each chapter within the learning activities book is aligned to, or actually is, one of the topic level learning objectives for the week. This is essentially the title of the chapter. And in doing so, this further strengthens the alignment between the learning objectives and the learning activities and helps students see the purpose of the content. And now I'm going to populate each chapter of my learning activities book with content that is well aligned to the topic level learning objectives. When I design the content on Moodle, I use the principles of universal design for learning. So UDL is not an intervention, it's not a strategy. UDL is a way of thinking about teaching and learning that helps give all students equal opportunities to engage with the material and succeed. It offers flexibility in the ways that students can access the material, how they engage with the material, and how they demonstrate what they've learned. So developing content using the principles of UDL can help all students succeed, but it may be particularly helpful for students with learning and thinking differences. I really like this quote about UDL. It says, UDL is not a special ed thing or even a general ed thing. It's just an ed thing. It's a way to connect every student to the learning experience and a way of looking at learning that is fully inclusive and promotes success for all learners, regardless of ability. So again, I want to highlight that UDL is a framework for delivering a range of different evidence-informed teaching strategies. And we want to think about UDL as more of a decision-making model that guides your instructional design rather than simply as one way of teaching. So the first principle of UDL is that the instructor should provide students with multiple means of representation of course content. So I've provided some examples here. Learners differ in the ways that they perceive and comprehend information that's presented to them. And this isn't because we have different, I guess, learning abilities or styles, but we have different preferences. Some learners prefer text, while others might prefer videos, and still others prefer pictures. So when presenting a concept, you might consider using, say, a textbook chapter, a video lecture, a graphic illustration of the concept, and a link to the website that explains the concept in action. Now, you don't need to provide every single means of representation for every concept, but it's a good idea to select a few for each. It allows students to explore the material from different angles and different perspectives. And again, in the spirit of constructive alignment, it's critical to ensure that the content is directly and explicitly linked to the learning outcomes for the topic. The second principle of UDL is that instructors should provide students with multiple ways to engage with the content. So again, learners differ in the ways in which they can be engaged or be motivated to learn. There are a variety of sources that can influence the ways in which students learn, including their neurology, their culture, their language, the relevance of the content to their own life, and their background knowledge. Some learners may be highly engaged by new material and spontaneous opportunities to respond and apply what they are learning, whereas others might be anxious or frightened by those aspects and prefer predictability and routine. Some learners might like to work alone, while others prefer to work with their peers. So when designing online learning experiences, there's lots of different ways that you can promote active student engagement with the content, including things like little interspersed knowledge checks, post-class quizzes, discussion forum questions and reflections, group activities using wikis or Google Docs, or having students work on small components of the assessment task at the end of each week. Again, it's critical to ensure the content is directly and explicitly linked to your learning outcomes. So for example, if you want your students to explain a concept, a discussion forum in which they write a response to a question would be a suitable learning activity. By contrast, if you want your students to identify a concept, a multiple choice quiz might be appropriate. The third principle of UDL is that instructors should provide students with multiple means of action and expression. So learners, again, differ in the ways that they can navigate a learning environment and demonstrate what they know. The action verbs included in your learning objectives should vary and should tap into different ways of learning or different ways of demonstrating what you've learned, such as identifying, explaining, analyzing, and doing. Here's an example of content aligned to the specific topic level learning objective. The content shown here is broken down into first an overview section that provides a text introduction to the topic, then a video lecture, and then an interactive knowledge check. So following the video lecture, the students can actually quiz themselves on the key concepts presented within the lecture and receive immediate embedded feedback on the accuracy of their responses. So including a lot of these types of embedded interactive activities can help keep students engaged with the material presented online. So now that your online content is designed, it's important to think about how you, as the instructor, will engage with your students. Again, this will help your students feel your presence within the unit, even though you are not sharing a physical classroom space. And it will also allow you to get to know your students and identify students who might need more support. In my units, one way that we do this is we supplement the online content by hosting a synchronous weekly online tutorial to review important concepts, but more importantly, to link concepts to real-world practical application. And in the tutorials, we use both polling and group discussions to get students actively responding. So polling provides an opportunity to assess whether or not the students are able to identify key terms and definitions. And group discussions allow us to assess student fluency, or the degree to which they're able to talk about new concepts with confidence and accuracy. If we detect that students seem to be struggling with either identifying different concepts or talking about different concepts, then we can stop and provide some additional instruction in those targeted areas, either within the online tutorial or provide some supplemental material on Moodle. Some weeks, we also include a post-class discussion forum where we give students the opportunity to answer questions about the material or provide a critical analysis of or reflection on the material. So we try to think about how we can help students link what they're learning in the unit to real-world issues in these forums. So we might provide students with an ethically tricky scenario or a challenge that they may face in their professional role. And we ask them to propose solutions. And we also try to link elements of our discussion forum post parts of the assessment. So sort of some similarity with what they might be asked to do as part of their assessment task. And this helps students see the benefit in actively posting and reading their classmates' posts. They know that they're getting new knowledge that will help them ultimately with their assessments. Now, we also maintain as instructors an active presence in the discussion forum. We read the student responses in the forums and we engage with them. And this has a number of benefits. So first, it allows us to gauge students who may be having some difficulty and who would otherwise not have indicated that they were confused. It gives students the opportunity to teach material to each other, which requires that they define, synthesize, and relate material that is being discussed. And it also gives students the opportunity to prepare for the assessment tasks. So I found that by setting up discussion forums in a really strategic way, following some of the sort of guidelines that I've just mentioned, we get a really high participation rate in the discussion forums, and they tend to be really engaging for students. We also strategically use Moodle Analytics and completion settings to track how students are moving through the unit. So this takes a little bit of time to learn how you can use data generated in the back end of the system to tell you how your students are going. We use something in Moodle called the Progress Tracker, which when we're setting up the activities, we use completion settings so that when students have completed the activity, it automatically gives them a little green tick on their progress tracker so they can see what they've finished and how much left they have to do. And at the beginning of the semester, we teach the students how to use their Moodle progress trackers to self-monitor their own completion of the online learning activities. And then we as instructors review the progress trackers at specific points in time throughout the semester. Now, if we review the progress trackers and we find that some students are falling behind in completing weekly activities, then we're able to reach out to them individually and see how they're going, see if they need some additional support. And we've actually found this to be extremely helpful for identifying and supporting students who may be at risk for dropping out or failing the unit. And they've really appreciated us taking the time to check in with them. And then we've been able to take the opportunity to refer them on to additional supports. Now, the last step in the 7-step model is to design with accessibility in mind from the start, rather than considering accessible online learning design to be an afterthought. So I could do a whole separate webinar just on the accessibility of online design. So today I'm just going to focus on a few top tips. We've already talked about the importance of clear and consistent navigation. Some other recommendations are to leave some white space in your content rather than cluttering your Moodle site with tons of text and graphics. So try to think about how you're putting material on the screen and ensure that it's easy to read, it's an appropriate size, spacing, and that you're leaving that white space to give people a bit of breathing room. Make sure that your videos include an option for students to turn on captioning. Or even better, think about how you might use free transcription software like Otter to create a transcript of each of your video lectures. Now, not only does this provide students with an alternative method of accessing the lecture, but it gives students a permanent product that they can all refer back to later on. I recommend not using color as the sole means of conveying information. Try to use other conventions like bold or underline. Underline is generally reserved for links that are clickable. So if you are using underlining, make sure that you're reserving that when you want to signal to a student that a link embedded within your site is clickable. You should also avoid uploading scans of Word documents, PowerPoint slide decks, or PDFs, because scanned documents are not searchable and they're not readable by screen readers. So Microsoft Office and Google Suite now both include a number of different built-in accessibility checkers in their products. So I recommend learning a little bit about how to use these accessibility checkers and get in the habit of using them as much as possible to ensure that all of your documents and resources that you're uploading are in fact accessible. I do want to give a quick shout out to a product. It's called the Brickfield Accessibility Toolkit, and it's now available, sort of the starter kit with certain subscriptions to Moodle. Brickfield is a plugin for Moodle, and it can actually read how your Moodle site is designed, and it can tell you whether there are accessibility problems with the design of your site. And it will also generate reports that show what parts of your site are accessible and what parts could be improved. Then, even better, it can automatically fix problem areas for you. So there may be problems with alt text for images or accessible file formats or issues with HTML tags. And this is a way to automate the process of checking and improving accessibility from the back end of Moodle. It's a really cool emerging product that we're hoping to get our hands on to do some bigger research around accessibility of online learning environments. So in summary, a key premise of our approach to online learning design is that there's no average learner. We recognize that every learner has a unique set of characteristics, including strengths, preferences, and learning needs that may change or evolve in varied contexts. So whether used in a classroom or online, creating a clear unit structure and incorporating the principles of UDL into learning design focuses on integrating flexible pathways to learning that can account for learner variability and really help set up all students for success. So thank you, everybody. It's been our pleasure to have the opportunity to present this to you today. And now we're happy to open it up for questions.
Great, thank you so much for that, Erin. It was fantastic, and to Laura, it was wonderful to have some really practical examples to share with us. And we had some great discussion. I think one of the great things people were saying awesome when you said certain things and so forth.
Oh, good.
Was quite
I didn't
engaging.
get to read. I didn't get to read the
you were
chat window.
you were very focused, which is great. And Laura's also gone ahead and answered a number of the questions. So I probably won't have a chance to read all those out, but what we're going to do after this is you'll get a link to the recording, and there will be all the questions and answers there on that page so people can come back and read those. But we've got a couple of questions that haven't been answered as yet. So the first question is, do you find the use of Moodle Activity Checker can become performative, i.e. students know what is measuring and therefore engage in performative posting instead of perhaps valuing other forms of engaging or reflection?
Certainly. I think first of all, in order for us to really maximize the degree to which we can facilitate high quality student engagement with these different types of activities on Moodle, we need to be really explicit in our sort of guidelines for students. What do we want them to do? Why do we want them to do it? And we find that giving them that sort of proactive information helps people really see the value in participating of a high quality. But of course, we do see, some elements of that when we want students to make a reply to a classmate's post, and their reply is quite simple in terms of its quality and its sort of detail. We do try to, as part of our moderation of the discussion forums, we try to model different high quality responses to students to give an exemplar of the types of responses that we're looking for. And then when we see students who make really high quality contributions, we try to call them out and just recognize, when we see really exemplary examples. That's a weird thing to say. And we also try to give kind but constructive feedback. And, I preempt my students at the beginning of the semester by saying, we're going to be really active in these sites, and we're going to ask you to put your behavior out there for everyone to see, and that can be uncomfortable, and that's totally normal. But the way you develop your understanding is by putting your behavior out there to let other people help shape your behavior and your new repertoires. And there's no silly questions or comments. We're all in this together. And just preempting it by making students feel welcome and comfortable, even if it's scary and new, can go a long way towards promoting engagement. Laura, do you have anything to add to that?
No, Erin, I think you covered it there. I would echo what you said around the quality of responses. Lorraine asked a great question around how you might motivate staff or students to engage in those kind of forums. And it does remain a challenge. And some of the response, I've shared 2 examples of ways you could do that. One is embedding it assessment, post and respond weekly, and you get a 10% grade. But with that, that's when you often see a decrease in quality in the posts. But your solution of modeling and being present, I found really impactful. Yeah.
Excellent. All right, there's another question here which I haven't read, so because people have upvoted for it, so it's gone up to the top. So is there not an issue that if you offer a range of types of media, e.g. for students to engage with according to their preference and what they feel comfortable with, they won't ever move out of their comfort zone and be exposed to other ways of learning? And especially if there are teacher education students, they might teach using their own particular preferences. Good question.
Yeah.
Let's get into the nitty-gritty stuff.
Yeah, that's a great question. The way that I set up my units is that certain activities are aligned to the progress tracker and are in essence mandatory. The students know that they need to complete those activities, and other provided resources or ways of engaging are optional. And so there are certain things that, yes, we want all people to be able to build their comfort level and their confidence to engage with, being able to have discussions with their peers, being able to write and put their words down on paper in a way where they can formulate an argument. Those types of things are generally going to be included as part of the student's experience. But in order to give them ways to gain the knowledge that they need to be successful, that's where we want to provide those multiple different types of content. And although they may not be mandatory that the students engage with those different types of content, they're there for students who feel like, well, I would just learn better if I had a way to look at how someone has applied this in their real world practice, or if I have the opportunity to listen to a podcast. So I think it's a balance, but it is a good question.
I use the principle around multiple representations perhaps a little bit differently. So if I have a 2-hour online workshop or tutorial, I'll divide that into 2. And I have 1 hour as the flip space where they engage with the multiple representations of whatever idea or concept we're exploring that week. And then we have the 1 hour that's synchronous, and we come together to do the kind of work that Erin was referring to earlier. But I actually, I kind of introduce the multiple representations and often guide the students to a gateway representation, the easiest form of engaging. It might be a blog post or a short YouTube clip, and then provide a sequence of stepping stones / representations that kind of get increasingly more complex. So for me, they don't just engage with one mode of representation. Usually over the course of about 2 hours as a package, they'll engage with most representations, but with increasing support and scaffolding as they move across, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. There's just a couple of quick questions I think that you could answer quickly. Is Brickfield free? No.
It's not free. There are different levels of the package depending on the number of features that you want. My understanding is that it is going to become standard, like the sort of entry level package with any subscription to Moodle 3.11 or higher. So if your institution has a Moodle subscription, then I would encourage you to look at the version and ask about getting Brickfield as part of your version. But if you want some of the higher level capabilities that it has to offer, there is a fee for that. And I don't unfortunately know what those fees are off the top of my head, but I know that the people involved in Brickfield, they're all on Twitter. So get on Twitter and tweet at them about what can I do with this? What do you recommend? But I think it's something we at Monash are currently looking at investing in because it can cut down on a lot of work done by humans and automate it, and with the end goal of improving the experience for students.
Excellent. Laura's busy answering one of the other easy questions, so that's good. You're doing very well there. Kind of another question from Eric, related to the above, have you found this useful to counter strategic learning and encourage deeper learning? And how have you employed assessment design in line with this?
So an example of how I've incorporated UDL into assessments is, I guess, it's this idea of providing choices to students, but close-ended choices. So they can't necessarily do anything that they want for their assessment because that would be too difficult to manage from a marking and a consistency point of view. But for example, in one of my units where I have students learn how to analyze a data set and develop a set of recommendations for a client based on a set of hypothetical data, I give them choices of the hypothetical data sets that they would like to pick from and use as the basis for their assessment. So they can pick a hypothetical data set that either is similar to the types of clients that they support. I work in clinical intervention. So the types of clients they support in their work, their professional work that they do, or do they want to step outside their comfort zone and pick a client and analyze a set of data that is very different to what they currently experience in their professional role? Again, students have different preferences as to what would have the most value for them. So it's this element of offering choice, but offering closed choices and ways where you can ensure consistency with marking and feedback, because for better or for worse, students care about fairness with assessment tasks and marking. So you do have to keep that in mind. Laura, any other suggestions?
No, Erin, no.
It's tricky when it's applied to assessment. I think that's an area where we could certainly benefit from more research and more practical or practice examples of how people are doing this really well in the assessment space.
We also had a couple of questions prior to the webinar, and one was how can this information, like will UDL be transferred to a high school setting? So I think you've got a little answer there, Erin.
Yeah, so if you're currently delivering online instruction to secondary school students because of COVID, the same principles that we talked about in this workshop today can certainly apply. I think what's tricky is that I will say the front end work involved with designing this sort of user experience, this sort of journey online, it does take some time, and it does necessitate that instructors build their own skills and confidence with becoming sort of learning designers in addition to educators. But some of the simple things you can do is just, think about the story that you're telling your students, think about those learning objectives for the topics, thinking about providing purpose. So you don't want your students to feel like they're just doing busy work, but you want them to feel like the work that they're doing is purposeful, even if it's offline on their own time behind the scenes. That's one thing. Now, the second thing I'll mention is that, again, coming back to this idea that UDL is not a teaching strategy, UDL is a framework for delivering a range of different types of teaching, types of activities, types of assessment. And so one thing that I'm really interested in looking at doing is how can we integrate the Universal Design for Learning framework with high impact teaching strategies? Now, high impact teaching strategies, or HITS, are a set of strategies that have been demonstrated to have a high level of evidence supporting their efficacy for bringing about meaningful learning for students in primary and secondary school contexts. And so we are currently writing an article that will be coming out next month that actually explores this integration of UDL and high impact teaching strategies to deliver high quality and accessible instruction to students in primary and secondary school contexts. So we'll be sure to post that article with the webinar recording once it comes out. But I think there's so much potential to integrate UDL into work in primary and secondary schools as well.
Excellent, thank you. We've posted a couple of links throughout this into chat. We had a couple of questions prior to this around supporting students with particular disability types such as autism or specific learning disabilities such as dyslexia and so forth. Just recommend that you look on the ADSET website. We have a whole heap of information around that. We have a great resource called Opening All Options, which is in our work section on the website that can provide you a whole heap of information around dyslexia and other specific learning disabilities that might assist you. I reckon just because you answer so wonderfully long, Erin, I might just ask one more question and then we'll finish up. So to what extent do you think that providing individual and kind feedback in a group discussion, whether live or asynchronous, can be motivational and encourage deeper peer-to-peer learning? Is there a risk that this reduces participation? I'd love to know what your experience has been.
I have biases about how I teach and what I think makes for effective, high quality teaching. And I'm a big proponent of direct and explicit instruction to give students the building blocks that they need to be successful. and then letting them apply that knowledge to solve new problems and things that they haven't experienced before. And part of that way of teaching is to use modeling and feedback. And so I think modeling and feedback can really enhance the experience for students, not make the experience less authentic. We learn in our day-to-day lives through modeling and feedback all the time. That's how we learn in the real world. And so I don't see incorporating those strategies in higher education as reductive or oh, hi, Keith. I just saw your comment. As reductive or problematic in terms of reducing students' intrinsic motivation. I think that it actually gives them the exemplars and the building blocks that they need to be creative and to be successful and to take their learning to a deeper level. So in my experiences, it has promoted high quality outcomes, not just the number of students who are doing certain things, but the quality of what they're doing. I found to be really, really high.
I think it's a good question to ask, and I probably have a slightly different perspective to Erin in that I have seen hints of the kind of challenges you're suggesting there, you know, risks to reducing participation, and a really successful way around that, at least for me, has been using Google Doc as the main site for students to respond to questions, tasks and activities, and we combine that with verbal discussion, but there's a much higher response rate, at least in my classes, using that mode than relying on verbal discussion alone, especially online, and student feedback suggests it's been a useful strategy.
Excellent. All right, well, we have run out of time. I just want to say a quick hi to Keith as well. I worked with Keith probably 30 years ago, so it was lovely to see his comments.
He's
there.
like
So
one
hi,
of
Keith.
my idols. I look up to him so much, and he's here.
That's brilliant. So thank you so much. The presentation, and I think people have put it into the chat, it was very valuable. It was so practical. I think just being a person who's done a lot of online learning in particular over the many years, you know, I think it's really important for you know, educators to see themselves, as you said, a mapper. I think it's really important that you know, it's kind of, yeah, I think sometimes when you go into different on-learning environments and it's all over the place and there's no consistent approach and it's not well mapped out for you, can just make learning so much harder. So it was fantastic to see that start and as a good starting point for all of us. UDL is something that ADCET is really looking at going further into. We're looking at doing an online learning module, which Erin's a part of that group. That should be coming on live in December. So it'll be an online module that you can go through to actually kind of understand UDL in a greater depth. So keep an eye out for that. I encourage you all to sign up to the ADCET newsletter so you can keep up to date with all that information and what's coming on. We will also be starting on the ADCET website a community of practice page where we can share what we're learning, update each other, share practice and so forth. So that's going to be in partnership with the National Disability Coordination Officers program. So it's another way for us to keep learning, keep developing our skills, because there are some amazing people out there doing some great stuff, as Laura and Erin have showed us today. And I think just us sharing our practice and what we're learning is also going to benefit the students that we're teaching and supporting. So thank you so much for your wisdom and time today. It was absolutely brilliant. It was great to have so many people online, and wonderful to see in the chat the passion and enthusiasm people have to make sure that education is inclusive for everybody. So have a great day, everybody, and thank you, and hope we see you again.
Thanks so much.
Bye, everyone.